Some days, life drifts by so slowly, as if everything is stuck in an endless loop of loneliness and stillness. That's how Mr. Jack lived the final years of his life. A small house nestled on the edge of town, a rickety wooden chair placed on the porch, and a barren garden with just a few scattered wildflowers. His entire world was confined within those familiar walls, devoid of laughter, absent of children's footsteps, and missing the warmth of the partner he had once loved more than anything. Jack had once been a strong soldier, a devoted husband, and a proud father. But time, like a cold and unyielding river, had swept away everything most precious to him. After losing his beloved wife to cancer, his now grown children had all left to build lives of their own. Jack held no resentment toward them. He understood that life is a journey, and sometimes that journey requires moving far away, to the point where loved ones become only memories. Yet understanding and acceptance are two entirely different matters. Jack tried to fill the void in his heart with daily routines, brewing a cup of coffee in the morning, reading an old book, or taking a walk in the nearby park. But these activities only amplified the emptiness. Each time he returned to his eerily silent home, he felt as though he was sinking into a bottomless pit, one devoid of light and hope. For many years, Jack's life resembled an old clock, ticking steadily but offering nothing new. His small house, located at the edge of town, was so quiet that he often felt like he lived in a world of his own, with no one around but himself and his memories. Day after day, he woke up as the first light pierced through the faded curtains. But there was no real reason to get out of bed, other than the alarm going off. Jack once had a complete family, a wife who loved him more than anything, and 2 children who brought him immense pride. But everything changed faster than he ever anticipated. His wife Mary had passed away from a cruel battle with cancer 10 years ago. Her death was not only the greatest loss of his life, but also a wound so deep that time could never heal. Jack, once strong and resilient, no longer recognized himself after Mary was gone. He became withdrawn, retreating from social connections as if the outside world no longer mattered. His children, now grown, had their own lives to live. They loved him, but the distance between them was greater than he had ever imagined. The phone calls to check in became increasingly rare, and visits home grew few and far between. It wasn't because they didn't care, Jack knew that, but because life's demands had swept them away. Sometimes he wondered if they sensed the loneliness eating away at him. But he would tell himself, they have their own lives to lead. I can't hold them back forever. Jack's days passed quietly, filled with familiar routines. Each morning he started by brewing a cup of black coffee, the kind Mary used to love. He would stand by the kitchen window, gazing out at the barren garden with the few wild rose bushes he no longer tended to. Breakfast was typically a piece of toast with a little butter, nothing more, nothing less. That was how he lived, minimalist, unassuming, and without expectation. On sunny days, he took walks in the nearby park. It wasn't a large park, just a few trails winding through bushes and a small pond in the center. Jack liked walking, not because he loved nature, but because it was the only thing that made him feel like he was doing something worthwhile. The steady rhythm of his footsteps on the leaf-strewn paths, the distant chirping of birds, and even the rustling wind through the trees gave him a brief sense of peace amidst his otherwise empty days. However, every time he returned home after his walks, the loneliness became even more pronounced. The small house was so silent that he could hear every tick of the clock on the wall. His dinners were usually a simple plate of food reheated in the microwave. He ate alone at the kitchen table, facing the empty chair that once belonged to Mary. Sometimes he would stare at that empty space, as though waiting for a miracle, a familiar voice, a laugh, or just a gentle touch. But all that greeted him was silence. In the evenings, he often read books. They were old novels Mary had bought when they were young, He read them over and over, not because he particularly enjoyed them, but because it was his only way of feeling like Mary was still around. On other nights, he would turn on the old radio and listen to the jazz music Mary had loved. The melodies occasionally brought a smile to his face, but more often than not, they brought tears to his eyes. Jack wasn't one to complain. He never spoke about his loneliness because he didn't want to be a burden to anyone. To those around him, he was simply kind neighbor Jack, always greeting people warmly, occasionally helping with repairs, and never bothering anyone. But inside, he was a lost man, trying to find meaning in the remaining days of his life. Every night before bed, Jack would stand at his bedroom window, gazing up at the starry sky. He often wondered if Mary was somewhere up there, watching over him. He questioned whether he was living the way she would have wanted, and whether life still had anything left to offer him, or if his days were now just a series of meaningless hours passing by. What Jack didn't know was that somewhere in a small corner of town, fate was waiting for him. A miracle, small but significant, was drawing closer with each passing day, though he remained oblivious. This was Jack's life before Lucky appeared. A quiet, empty existence, filled with unanswered questions. But, like every story, this silence was merely the prelude to a new chapter. A chapter brimming with light, hope, and a friendship that would transcend words. It was an autumn afternoon when the sky was heavy with gray clouds and a light rain had just drenched the winding park paths. Jack kept to his walking routine despite the dampness and chill in the air. For him, the park was the only place where he could glimpse faint traces of life, even as those colors grew dimmer with the changing season. Yellow leaves blanketed the path, and each of Jack's steps rustled softly in the quiet surroundings. Pulling his thick coat tighter around himself, Jack buried his hands deep in his pockets for warmth. A gentle breeze carried the earthy scent of wet soil and dry leaves. The park was deserted. Everyone else had long gone. Only Jack remained, walking slowly as always. He didn't have a destination in mind. He was simply walking to stretch another aimless day a little further. As he turned into a small bend in the path, a strange sound made him stop. It was a whimper, faint and trembling, like a cry for help from a small, helpless creature. Jack turned his head, his eyes scanning the bushes along the path. At first he thought it might just be the wind stirring the dry branches, but the sound came again, clearer and more urgent this time. Curiosity mixed with a tinge of worry as Jack cautiously moved toward the sound. And then he saw it. Underneath a large oak tree lay a small dog, curled up on the damp ground. Its light brown fur was matted with rainwater and mud, making it appear even smaller. Its frail body trembled with the cold, and its eyes, those eyes stopped Jack in his tracks. Big, round, and glistening with fear, they held a faint glimmer of hope, as if the little creature were waiting for a miracle, a hand to save it. Jack said nothing. He simply stood there, staring at the tiny being before him, a wave of emotion rising in his chest. How long had it been since he had felt this way? How long since someone or something had looked at him with such pure trust? He closed his eyes and took a seat beneath the trees. "Hello, little one," he murmured softly. His deep, warm voice meant to reassure. The dog flinched, his head stirring slightly, but it seemed too weak to run away. Jack slowly knelt, extending his hand, his palm open as if offering an invitation. "It's okay. I won't hurt you," he whispered, his voice carrying a gentleness that even he hadn't known he still possessed. The dog stared at him, its gaze cautious but steady. Then, as though an invisible thread connected them, it inched slightly closer. Jack stayed perfectly still, waiting. He knew that any sudden movement might scare it away. After a few moments of hesitation, the small dog took another step forward, gently pressing its head against the palm of Jack's hand. The hesitant touch was small and fragile, yet it was enough to make Jack's heart tremble. "You're a little warrior, aren't you?" Jack said with a faint smile. He used his sleeve to wipe the mud from its face, revealing adorable floppy ears and a tiny nose. "No one deserves to be left behind like this." Jack scooped the dog into his arms, feeling its frail, trembling body against his chest. It was as light as a leaf, and Jack couldn't shake the sense that he was cradling not just a small creature, but the pain and fragility of the world itself. He didn't know what to do next, but one thing was clear. He couldn't leave it there. On the way home, Jack shielded the little dog from the cold wind with his coat. The dog lay still in his arms, occasionally letting out a soft whimper as if to confirm it was safe. And for the first time in years, Jack felt his heart warm. When they arrived home, Jack laid the dog on a clean towel and began drying and warming it. He filled a bowl with water, opened a can of food he had left in the cupboard, and placed them in front of the dog. It looked at him with wary eyes, but slowly moved closer and started eating. Watching it, Jack couldn't help but smile. "You'll be okay, little one," he said, as if reassuring himself as well. After a bath and some grooming, the dog looked completely different. Its soft brown fur began to fluff up as it dried, and it curled up on an old blanket Jack had placed in the kitchen. Its eyes, heavy with exhaustion, seemed more at ease. Jack sat beside it, gently stroking its fur. "You need a name, don't you?" he mused, thinking for a moment before letting out a quiet chuckle. "Lucky. You're lucky because you're lucky, and so am I." That night, for the first time in years, Jack didn't feel lonely. The sound of Lucky's small paws on the wooden floor, its gentle breathing as it lay curled up beside the sofa, and the knowledge that another life depended on him, all of it filled the emptiness in his heart. Even if just a little. Jack gazed at the sleeping dog, a faint smile playing on his lips. At that moment, he didn't think about the past or worry about the future. All he knew was that, in the present, he and Lucky had found each other. And sometimes, that was enough. From the day Lucky entered Jack's life, the little house on the edge of town was no longer as silent as before. Each morning, instead of waking to emptiness, Jack was greeted by the clatter of Lucky's paws on the wooden floor and its ever-wagging tail. Though timid at first, the small dog quickly seemed to understand that this was home, a safe place where it belonged. Jack started each day by preparing breakfast, not just for himself but for Lucky too, a plate of eggs and a slice of toast for Jack, and a small bowl of food for the dog. Lucky ate eagerly, its floppy ears dipping endearingly as it lowered its head, while its eyes frequently glanced up at Jack, as if to say, "Thank you." Jack often found himself chuckling, a sound he hadn't heard from himself in a long time. "You seem to really enjoy my cooking, Lucky," he joked, gently patting the dog's head. After breakfast, they went for their daily walk in the park. The path that once amplified Jack's loneliness had become a source of quiet joy. Lucky darted around, sniffing everything from tree branches to fallen leaves, occasionally pausing to look back at Jack as if to make sure he was still there. "Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere," Jack said, feeling a strange comfort in talking to a dog. But he realized that with Lucky, he had found a true companion, one that would never judge or leave him. Then, as by the magic of psychedelics, a door opened and the suppressed memories of his past appeared from the darkness. As time passed, the bond between Jack and Lucky deepened. With its natural instincts, Lucky seemed to have an uncanny ability to sense Jack's emotions. On some afternoons, Jack would sit on the porch, his gaze distant as he thought about Mary and the days they had shared. Lucky, instead of running around as usual, would quietly approach and sit beside him. It would rest its head on his knee, as if to say, "I'm here, don't be sad." In those moments, Jack felt an unspoken understanding between them, a silent promise that neither of them would face the world alone again. Lucky wasn't just a dog. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, a small spark of connection could light the way forward. Jack often stroked Lucky's soft fur, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. "You know, Lucky," he said in his warm, deep voice, "you remind me that there's still a reason to live, still something worth cherishing in this life." The days no longer passed with the same monotonous rhythm as before. Jack began to notice and care for the little things he had once overlooked. He tidied up his small garden and replanted the flowers Mary had loved. Lucky followed closely, sometimes clumsily, digging at the soil, causing Jack to burst into laughter. "Are you helping me or making a mess?" Jack laughed, his voice echoing in the serene garden. When winter arrived, Lucky became Jack's source of warmth during the cold nights. The dog curled up by the fireplace, its ears twitching slightly whenever Jack walked by. In the evenings, Jack would sit in his old armchair, reading familiar books, with Lucky lying at his feet, its steady breathing like a lullaby easing Jack into tranquility. At times, Jack felt as if he were living in another world, a world without pain or loss, filled only with the comforting presence of Lucky. One day, while cleaning out an old bookshelf, Jack found a photograph of Mary. It was a spring photo taken years ago, when they were young and brimming with happiness. Jack sat down, his gaze fixed on the picture, a flood of memories rushing back. As always, Lucky approached quietly. It rested its head on Jack's knee, its dark eyes full of deep understanding. "You know, Lucky," Jack said, his voice trembling, "Mary would have loved you. She adored dogs, and I think she'd be happy knowing you're here, taking care of me." Lucky gently nudged Jack's hand, as if silently agreeing. At that moment, Jack felt a strange connection between the past and the present. Lucky wasn't just a dog. It was a bridge linking Jack's old wounds to the new hope blossoming in his heart. Over time, Jack realized that Lucky wasn't just filling the void in his life, it was teaching him to love again. He began to open up to those around him. Neighbors, who had always known him as the quiet old man, were surprised to see Jack engaging in conversations and even smiling when they met at the park. Lucky, with its friendly nature, quickly became the star of the neighborhood, often receiving pats and compliments. "You truly bring me luck, Lucky," Jack said one sunny morning as he watched a group of children playing with his dog. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of light in his heart, a glimmer of faith in life and the goodness the future could hold. The friendship between Jack and Lucky needed no words. It was built on small but meaningful moments. The gentle strokes of fur, the knowing glances, and the quiet yet warm presence they shared. Jack knew that Lucky could never replace what he had lost, but it had given him something priceless, a reason to wake up each morning, to take another step, and to keep living. And so, from an abandoned dog and a lonely man, they found each other and wrote a story of friendship that transcended the boundaries between humans and animals. A simple story, yet one that warmed the heart. Time seemed to move faster since Lucky entered Jack's life. Each day began with small joys. The sound of Lucky's paws clattering on the wooden floor, its round eyes following Jack as he prepared breakfast, or Jack's rare laughter when Lucky clumsily tried to jump onto the sofa, only to slide off. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, far beyond a typical friendship between a man and his dog. Lucky wasn't just a companion. It was family, the sole source of light in Jack's life. One spring afternoon, as the gentle sunlight bathed the small garden, Jack decided to take Lucky out for their usual playtime. He had a worn-out tennis ball ready, Lucky's favorite toy. They walked along the familiar trail to the park, where children were playing and others were out walking their dogs. Lucky wagged its tail enthusiastically, its eyes sparkling as if it could sense the joy in the air. "All right, Lucky, ready?" Jack called out, throwing the tennis ball far ahead. Lucky immediately darted after it, its small but energetic legs bounding across the grass. The dog always brought the ball back, dropping it at Jack's feet and looking up at him with eager eyes. The moment never failed to make Jack laugh. He felt like he was reliving his younger days, playing with his children at the park. But the joy didn't last long. As Jack and Lucky were making their way back home, an unexpected accident occurred. Distracted, Jack slipped on a loose rock and fell hard to the ground. His knee hit the earth with a force that sent pain radiating through his body. He tried to get up, but couldn't. Lucky, who had been running ahead, immediately turned back. Seeing Jack lying on the ground, its small face was filled with visible concern. He was trying to guide the dog in the direction they should go, back toward his bungalow. "It's all right, Lucky. Just a fall," Jack whispered, his voice weaker than he expected. But Lucky wasn't convinced. The dog began barking loudly, its voice echoing across the quiet afternoon. Jack had never heard Lucky bark like that before. Each bark carried a sense of urgency, as if it were desperately calling for help. A woman walking her dog nearby heard the barking and rushed over. "Are you okay?" she asked, her eyes filled with worry as she saw Jack struggling to sit up. I think I need a little help," Jack replied, trying to muster a reassuring smile. With the woman's assistance, he managed to stand, but the pain in his knee made it impossible to walk far. Lucky stayed right by his side, its eyes never leaving him for a moment. The kind woman called for an ambulance, and when Jack was taken to the hospital, Lucky patiently sat beside him. The dog didn't leave his side, not even for a moment. As nurses tended to Jack's injuries, Lucky waited outside the hallway, its sad eyes following every movement inside. Even some of the hospital staff were moved by its loyalty. "You've got a very special dog there," one nurse told Jack. He smiled, feeling an unexpected sense of pride. Until now, he hadn't felt himself build like that, in a matter of hours. When Jack returned home after the incident, he realized that Lucky wasn't just a companion, it was his protector, the light guiding him through difficult times. He couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if Lucky hadn't been there that day. Who would have heard his cries for help? Who would have come to his aid? After the accident, Jack became more cautious in everything he did, but his love and trust for Lucky only deepened. One time, when Jack caught the flu and was bedridden for an entire day, Lucky stayed by his side. It didn't run or play as usual, but lay quietly at the foot of his bed, its eyes watching over him with unwavering vigilance. Once, Jack woke in the middle of the night to find Lucky dozing beside him. The moonlight cast a soft glow over its fur, creating a scene so warm and serene that Jack knew he would never forget it. On another evening, as Jack sat in his armchair reading, Lucky suddenly trotted over with an old handkerchief in its mouth, one that Mary had once used. Jack took the handkerchief, a wave of nostalgia washing over him as he remembered his wife. "You really know how to remind me of what matters, Lucky," he said, gently stroking its soft fur. Lucky didn't respond, but its eyes seemed to convey everything Jack needed to know: empathy, love, and unwavering loyalty. In that moment, Jack realized that while Mary was no longer with him, Lucky had helped him rediscover the meaning of life. It couldn't replace what he had lost, but it had brought him something he never thought he'd find again: hope. And so, day by day, Jack and Lucky built new memories together, slowly filling the empty spaces in both their hearts. Their friendship wasn't just a bond between a man and his dog. It was a testament to the power of love, a force capable of healing even the deepest wounds and bringing light to the darkest moments. Time never stops, no matter how much you wish to hold on to it forever. The days shared between Jack and Lucky were filled with warmth and small joys. But one morning, Jack woke up and realized that Lucky was no longer the energetic dog he had once brought home. Lucky had grown old. Its steps were slower, its breathing heavier, and its once bright eyes now held a weariness Jack couldn't ignore. Jack tried not to dwell on it, but deep down, he knew their time together was running out. One winter afternoon, Jack and Lucky went on their usual walk. The cold wind swept through the park, carrying the scent of impending snow. Lucky moved more slowly than usual, its legs unsteady. Jack stopped, sat down beside the dog, and gently stroked its now gray fur. "Are you all right, Lucky?" Jack asked, his voice low as though afraid of the answer that might break his heart. Lucky looked up at him, its tender eyes filled with a sorrow Jack had never seen before. It softly nudged his hand with its head, a familiar gesture that Jack had grown to love so much. They sat there for a long time in the empty park. Jack said nothing more, simply savoring each precious moment they still had together. A few weeks later, Lucky stopped eating. It no longer ran or played around the house, but instead lay quietly on the old blanket Jack had placed by the fireplace. Jack called the veterinarian to the house, his heart heavy as he listened to the diagnosis. Lucky was facing old age and an incurable illness. "We can make it comfortable," the vet said with compassionate eyes. Jack nodded, but his heart felt shattered. He couldn't imagine life without Lucky. Since the day it entered his life, every moment had taken on new meaning, and now the thought of losing it felt like staring into an abyss of emptiness once again. Jack sighed. In the days that followed, Jack spent all his time with Lucky. He read books beside it, told stories from his younger years, and often stroked its soft fur. Lucky was too weak to go for long walks, but each afternoon, Jack would open the door so the sunlight could stream into the spot where Lucky lay. He brought it the foods it once loved, even though Lucky would only sniff at them and look at him with eyes that seemed to say, "Okay, as long as you're here." One evening, as Jack sat beside Lucky by the glowing fireplace, the dog lifted its head slightly and looked at him. Its eyes were filled with love, as though it was thanking him for everything he had done. Jack leaned down, placed his hand on Lucky's head, and whispered, "You're the greatest gift life has ever given me, Lucky. You saved me, and I'll always love you." Lucky gently nudged Jack's hand one last time before softly closing its eyes. Jack sat there, feeling its breaths grow slower until they stopped altogether. There was no sound, no struggle. Lucky passed away in the arms of the person it trusted most. Jack didn't know how long he sat beside Lucky. It might have been hours or just a few minutes. Time seemed to stand still. Eventually, he lifted Lucky's small, light body and carried it to the garden where they had once played with the old tennis ball. Under the faint light of the moon, he dug a small grave and laid Lucky to rest near the flower bushes Mary had loved so much. The next morning, Jack sat on his porch, gazing at the small tree he had planted to honor Lucky. He didn't feel as lonely as he had the day Mary passed. Instead, he felt a strange sense of peace. Lucky had taught him how to love again, how to cherish the small moments in life. And, though it was no longer there, the love and memories Lucky left behind would always be a part of him. Jack picked up his old journal, opened to a fresh page, and began to write. Today Lucky is gone. It lived a short but meaningful life. It wasn't just a dog, it was a friend, family, and the one who helped me find myself again. I will miss it, but I know it will always be here, in my heart. As he finished writing, Jack looked up at the sky where the first rays of sunlight shone down on the garden. A faint smile crossed his lips. Life could be full of loss, but it also brought miracles, and Lucky was one of those miracles, a light that would forever illuminate his heart. Spring returned to Jack's small house, bringing with it gentle breezes and the fragrance of early blooms. The once neglected garden now blossomed with vibrant colors, each corner breathing life. The rosebush Mary had loved stood tall and radiant, its crimson blooms a poignant reminder of her enduring love and presence. Beside it, the small tree Jack planted in memory of Lucky sprouted fresh green leaves, reaching upward under the warm sunlight. Jack sat on his wooden chair on the porch, holding a cup of hot tea. He quietly observed the garden, a feeling welling up inside him that he couldn't quite name. It wasn't pure joy, but neither was it sadness. It was peace, a state he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Lucky was gone, but Jack no longer felt the sharp pang of loss as he had in the early days. He sensed Lucky's presence in everything around him, in the rustling of the wind through the trees, in the warm rays of sunlight on the porch steps, and even in his dreams. He knew Lucky hadn't truly disappeared. It remained with him, in his memories and in the love he carried for it. One afternoon, while tidying up his small room, Jack stumbled upon the old tennis ball Lucky had adored. It lay quietly in a corner, its outer layer frayed but still intact. Jack picked it up, his heart swelling with memories. He smiled, his eyes misting slightly, not from sadness, but from gratitude. Gratitude for having had Lucky in his life, even if only for a short time. Jack began writing a small book about Lucky, not for publication but to preserve the memories. He wanted to tell the story of a little dog that saved a lonely man, of a friendship that transcended boundaries, and of how a small life could bring about profound change. Each page became a tribute from Jack to Lucky, a way to keep its memory alive in his heart. In the book, Jack wrote, "Lucky came into my life when I needed it most. It couldn't speak, yet its presence said things words could never convey. It taught me that love doesn't require words, that happiness comes not from grand gestures, but from the simplest moments." Lucky wasn't just a dog. It was a friend, family, and a guiding light through my darkest days. When the book was finished, Jack carefully wrapped copies and sent one to each of his children. He didn't include an explanation, only a note that read, "This is the story of Lucky, the way it changed my life." A week later, Jack received a call from his eldest daughter. "Dad," her voice trembled, "I read Lucky's story. I don't know what to say, but I feel like I understand you better now, like I'm closer to you than I've ever been. I'm sorry for leaving you alone for so long." Jack smiled, his tone calm yet warm. "It's all right, sweetheart. Life pulls us in many directions, but I know you've always loved me." But from that point on, Jack's children visited him more often. The small house was no longer quiet. Laughter and conversation gradually filled the spaces that had once been consumed by silence. Though Lucky was no longer there, its presence lingered in every story, every memory Jack shared with his family. Spring breathed new life not only into the garden, but also into Jack's heart. Lucky's memory remained a constant source of inspiration and love, a reminder of the profound impact of even the smallest beings. Through the seasons, Jack found solace in knowing that life, while marked by loss, also brought miraculous connections that could heal and illuminate the soul. And so, the story of Jack and Lucky became more than just a tale of man and dog. It became a testament to love, resilience, and the enduring light that even the darkest moments cannot extinguish. Lucky, though gone, would forever remain Jack's miracle, a beacon of hope and renewal in his journey through life. One morning, Jack stood on his porch, watching the sunlight filter through the garden. A gentle breeze swept by, carrying a familiar scent, the smell of earth, grass, and the countless afternoons spent with Lucky. Closing his eyes, Jack smiled softly. "Thank you, Lucky," he whispered. "You gave me more than I could ever have hoped for." Life is a journey woven with loss and joy. There are moments when you feel lost, as if all meaning has faded, but sometimes even the smallest presence, like an abandoned dog, can change everything. Lucky stepped into Jack's life, not to replace what he had lost, but to show him that happiness can be found in the simplest of things. Love, no matter how small or understated, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Embrace it, cherish the moments you have, and never underestimate the transformative strength of love, whether it comes from people or animals. Jack's life, once trapped in hopeless silence, was reignited by a small, vibrant being named Lucky. This little dog was not just a companion during lonely days, but a source of strength that helped Jack rediscover the meaning of life. In their short but profound time together, Lucky taught Jack and us valuable lessons about love, loyalty, and the power of compassion. We all face days when everything seems to fall apart, when the reasons to keep going feel elusive. But sometimes all it takes is one moment, one meeting, or one presence to change everything. For Jack, Lucky wasn't a grand miracle that transformed his entire existence, but a small, gentle light, strong enough to lead him out of the darkness. Jack came to realize that the essence of life doesn't lie in grand achievements, but in the simple, quiet moments and the profound connections we make with the world around us. It might be the trusting gaze of a dog, the warmth of an afternoon by the fire, or just the comforting knowledge that you're not alone. Now, as Jack sits on his porch, watching the garden bloom under the sun, his heart is filled with peace. He no longer fears loss or dwells on the pain of the past. Instead, he knows that the people he loves, though physically gone, will always live on in his heart. And Lucky, the little dog who came into his life on a rainy afternoon, will forever symbolize love, hope, and renewal. The story of Jack and Lucky isn't just about a unique friendship. It's a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can make a profound difference. Sometimes you don't need to change the world. Just changing one life, one moment, or one small being's reality can be deeply meaningful. Slow down, love more, cherish what you have, no matter how small. Because often, it's the simplest things that hold the keys to a fulfilled life. And if you're as fortunate as Jack, perhaps one day, you too will find your own Lucky.